Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. As always, if you have any questions along the way, there's the Q&A function, or you can write to us in the chat where, well, I'm watching, and for sure I will pass any questions along. And I'd like to introduce you to a long time, really, like, companion of mine in this journey, even though we didn't really connect that much along the way, but I feel like we've been watching each other progress
Yeah,
all these years, really, for the last, like, 10 years.
yeah,
It's Amanda.
no
Welcome,
problem.
Amanda.
Thank you, Flavia. Thank you for having me. I think you're spot on. We were parallel paths like the whole way
Yeah.
through. Mutual like admiration, I think, both ways. So it's great to be here. Yeah.
And now we have the chance to do this, and
Yes.
about a topic that I really felt the reason why I chose it is not because you know me, I'm not like looking at trends or
Mhm.
to decide what to focus on, but because it was something that I found interesting, and actually I even talked to my designer about at some point, and I was like, I really don't think I know enough. I told him about content design, and I'm like, I'm sure I've been in it. I'm sure I've even done it sometimes, but I don't really I want to be more educated and more wise about the
Yeah.
subject because I knew it was very important. And then as I dove into the subject a bit more, I looked at what you were posting, and because you were the first one I thought of when I thought about this topic, I was like, ah,
Oh,
Amanda.
I'm honored. I'm one of many, many, many UX experts out there. So yeah, I'm glad that you reached out. I think, it's funny how time goes by. I think it's been 10 years or something since we've like
Mhm.
been on each other's radar and like just how your journey unfolds over like almost 10 years is crazy. But yes, like there is a whole community now of UXers. There wasn't, 10 years ago. And so here we are. I'm happy to like be sharing this with you. So yeah, we'll get into it.
Awesome. For those of you who don't know, so Amanda has done really it all in the sense that no, really, in the sense that and I'm sure she'll dive more into this as we discuss, but she had her own studio. That she went into the corporate world as well. So she was, a content design lead for Capital One, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so really for me, it's just a well-rounded, opinion and thought leader to bring into the space. And for sure, the first thing I want to ask you is how do you define content design? Like where do we start in kind of
Yeah,
formulating
yeah.
this
It's a
conversation?
it's a great question. I think it's one of the most foundational questions, something I get asked a lot. And I was thinking about this. I was like, how can I create like a metaphor between like marketing, communications, and like UX writing? And so if like marketers sort of get you to the door, you attract, you bring in customers or users or clientele to the front door of a brand. UX writers and UX content designers are the people that are responsible for like helping users know where to go once they are in that door. So UX content designers focus a lot on navigation. So the flow of an experience, moving between screens, accomplishing tasks, being able to check a box, to say if you are like in the US, we're filing our taxes right now. Or like if you get in a car accident to submit a, insurance claim, the navigation steps involved in those types of tasks are kind of what UX content designers focus on. And it can really run the gamut between, industries, products in the financial space, in the B2B space, what have you. But I think at a minimum, UX content designers are really focused on direction, moving you forward, allowing you to accomplish something, and making sure that you feel reassured, successful, and like you're fully comprehending the experience that you find yourself in. So the lines are very blurred sometimes. You definitely I think as a content designer, you step into or you have sort of the language of marketing. You have to be fluent in it. Certainly working with a lot of, marketers and branding people and editorial people. The lines are very blurred, it's very cross-functional and fluid. But the sort of like art and science of content design is really rooted in a lot of research, a lot of prototyping, a lot of like interaction design, and even getting into things like information hierarchy and types of content and filtering and search functionality. Those are some of the things that are unique to, I'd say, content design. So that's where it it branches off a little bit. But yeah, that's the question, I think, especially as UX like content was sort of coming to the fore a little bit. It evolved, I think, back in 20 I'd say 2012 was like a turning point. It may have even been sooner. Web design was like what we knew content design as. It was just web design, a web page, the flow of that page. It's since evolved now into this sort of like practice, and so that's what we now call content design, yeah, as an area of specialty. So it's a really unique space to be in. I love it, and yeah, I just get to flex so many different muscles, which is like the best part of it. So yeah, it's the place to be.
I think the thing that drew me to content design is because content as a as a word is being used so strangely these days, and I I s I struggle with calling things content pieces the same way I struggle with calling thought leadership a type of content, because for me, it's a mindset. There are principles behind it. It's not like, "Oh, this thought leadership content," or and I always felt like content was being used inappropriately. And then when I started, discussing more and more content design, and I realized that, even the words on a button, or, when you're describing content design, I think about wayfinding, in an airport, for example. That's like probably the most, like, how easy is it for me to find my way around to get where I need to be? I'm on a time crunch. I have, my stuff going on. I think it's a really good analogy for this, for like the emotional state that a user can be in, even in a
Yeah.
digital space. And for somebody, or for like an entire group of people to call every word content,
Yeah.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Like, there's something about that that I love.
Yeah.
That's
Like
because otherwise
every
you say content and people think of just like these big pieces, and and I'm sitting there and I'm the kind of person that's like, no, every word matters. And let me bring in, some content designers to explain to you their experience of how changing
Absolutely.
one word clicked for an entire experience across like so many different touch points. Is that
Absolutely.
accurate?
That is so accurate. I feel like you're spot on. So, like, everything is content, right? Like, every word, even images, scripts, campaigns, ads, words on a map, like you just said, wayfinding, like the words, the structure, the layout of that map. Things that are not even, like, words, like, are considered, like, content. We're sort of
Yeah,
back at the
true.
point now in content design where we're like, "This is just design." Like, I'm actually just doing UX. Like, there's the content, but then it's, like, those principles you mentioned, the way things sort of get designed, the mindsets that go into it. It's like there's content, the actual words, the, like, what UI designers say, like the pixels, like it's like that version. But then there's just the flow of things, the hierarchy, order, the way it all comes together. That's content, but it's also just pulling up that's just design. And so there's definitely like a school of thought, I think, in content design where you have people that are very like editorial and very like rigorous in how content is written, phrased, the sort of like mechanical, grammatical side of content, like how the words and language land. And then there's also like the sort of strategists that combine that editorial with how this all fits into like a larger ecosystem. I think like an airport map is like such a great example. That wayfinding, that is the core of like UX. That is, you can apply that thinking to, any kind of design, whatever that is. I keep saying like file your taxes. It could also be, it's like something fun, like in Spotify, being able to start in one channel and move to another. Like that is also all content and all design and how you move between channels even. So yeah, like bottom line, everything is content, and then beyond that, it's like content is actually design, and it's all one thing. And as you get deeper into the work and beyond just words, you kind of zoom out, this levels of zoom concept that I can share more about. Like that's really the heart, I think, of this work and seeing a bigger picture, but also seeing a very granular component or piece of content as well within that bigger picture.
This is what I love about it.
Yeah.
And this is why I think it sits parallel to a lot of the stuff that we do in comms, okay, when the stuff is done properly, in my opinion, in comms, in brand strategy, in brand messaging, I feel like a lot of steps are skipped, but in a space like yours, you can't possibly skip the steps. And this is
There is
what
a
I kind of
formula.
what I
Yeah.
kind of love. Like you can't skip the steps because something needs to be there. Every step needs to be accounted for. And
Yeah.
the irony, and I don't know if you've seen this parallel kind of in your experience, is that if pixels were off, because you mentioned pixel, if
Mhm.
something is not pixel perfect, I feel like a lot of people can see it. A lot of people can tell. And a lot of leaders are sticklers for that. But it's the same trap of thinking that only what is visible, like the visual aspect of it, the design half, let's say,
Yeah.
of the concept that you just mentioned is what's important. And not so many people give attention to the words. I went into this conversation thinking about that because I was saying, okay, maybe I'm fighting this notion also for when you think of visual identity versus verbal identity. And I'm fighting for, verbal identity's right to party because of how
Yeah.
important it is. And I
Yeah.
found that content design was like a parallel that maybe I can use in my conversations to say, no, 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 they're both important and both need to be taken step by step. And here's
Absolutely.
why.
There's a huge amount of for content designers, UX content designers, UX writers, a huge amount of advocacy that is happening in the space. So ask, any one of us, like will tell you there's a lot of time spent sort of talking to stakeholders, talking to the C-suites, talking to, head of design, what have you, and really making the case for you're investing so heavily in visuals, in UI, in brand, in like the look and feel, all the like polished aesthetic things. But that falls flat if the language isn't there too. And so there were, I've been part of those conversations where you literally would like strip the words out of a prototype or a flow or product, page or something and say, now do you think content's important? Like if we actually remove the words and show you a blank page, that really lands and those people get it. And then there's like conversation about we need to be investing and giving this the time it needs to like do the process right, which looks like spending time in research, not just having a biased opinion of how something should be, but really validating that with people. Is this something they'll actually use? Do they actually understand it? Not just my product's the best thing. Let's push it out there, put, a bunch of fancy polish on it and, get it out there, but actually testing it with real people, user testing, what's called guerrilla testing. It's like kind of just going out on the street and asking somebody like, "Does this track?" That's a really key part of this industry as well. And so, yeah, UX designers are very like very dogged about that, like very much advocating for getting that process right. Beyond the research, then it gets into it needs the right amount of time. So scoping the work, like making sure there's time to actually thoughtfully, intentionally, like, approach the problem space and not just rush work just to ship something. Sometimes even in research, you'll get feedback and you have to go back to the drawing board, and it's a total 180 from what you originally, thought people would connect to or understand, and people are like, "What is this? I am having a lot of trouble with this." There's, like, huge hiccups in the design, really eye-opening, especially to those leaders who are like, "Well, let's just push it and get the product out there, the feature out there." Sometimes you have to take a little bit of a detour, come back, and, like, make those tweaks, and that is the job of, like, a content designer. They are there to shepherd through that process, advocate for doing it right, giving it the time it needs, and then for those, UX designers that are in, like, say, a larger team, making sure that, like, you have multiple bodies of work or multiple projects, making sure there's time to get to all of it, that there's the bandwidth to actually, like, give everything the right amount of time. So, yeah, absolutely. Like, there's rigor to UX in a way that's different from something like, graphic design or really heavy like UI or just like kind of interaction design where it's so focused on the look, the feel, the aesthetic, the like making sure it looks cool. Like that is a huge craft. That is a very important craft as well. It goes hand in hand. UX is very like there's a rigor, a process, we have to abide by it, almost like a sense of, like, right, that, like, we have to do this right if we're actually gonna build and spend our time doing this and invest in it. And so, yeah, that's something I love about it too. There's a little bit of, like, almost an academics, like, kind of approach to it where there's, like, a formula we follow from inception or intent all the way through, like, delivery where, yeah, you just sort of check the box along the way, and then getting that validation and those feedback loops is what's really exciting as you go through that process. You're like, "Okay, this resonates with people. People are actually understanding it. They actually use it. We feel good about launching it." And then the business, the company, the brand, the business feels good about, like, their return on investment, that they are actually going to ship a product that will be successful, that will make money, that will save people time or hassle, that will convert or, like, avoid customer frustration even. So, it's really important. Yeah, there's a reason for all the chaos that kind of goes into the process, the organized chaos, I should say.
I wonder what it is about because I'm listening to you speak and
Mhm.
all of these things about, how there's a process and we need to do it right and rigor. And I'm sitting here wondering, what is it about content design that allows for that space and for following that rigor that the rest of us can't really get to, let's say, because in my opinion, everything should be done that way. Everything should have that level of rigor. Everything should have that level of confidence that when I put it out there, I'm not waiting for engagement metrics to tell me that I'm successful. I know because of the process I have internally, because of the principles or the values or the intention, whatever it might be internally, that this is going to work or this is what people need. And I'm confident about that.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering what it is about content design and maybe what it has to do with human interaction or something like this. Like maybe it's more palpable. I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
thinking out loud that allows people to understand, we need to do this right. This requires the time that it requires
yeah.
and everybody kind of collectively accepts that.
Yeah, that's a really, really that's such an insightful thing to say. I think my own opinion on it is that content designers in particular, if you look at the sort of timeline of like UX kind of became UX, what we're calling UX, it was web design, it then became UX. We had the early days, like Christina Halverson was like one of the very first people to sort of coin like, content strategy principles. If you look at like who content strategists are, content designers are, a lot of us come from fields that are tangentially like related. So a lot of people are ex academics, like I said, like they are, having worked in like library sciences, for example, you have people that were really heavy in the editorial space. And that's why they're very like big on, grammar, mechanics, like AP style guide. Like people come from these other industries. Some others I can think of, people that worked in publishing, journalists, a lot of people that were, myself included, like my roots were kind of in like journalism, and there was something there and just kept following it. And then it's like, oh, there's like UX. This is a thing. I can apply that to UX. So I think it's really like the people that are like upholding that. And then kind of like doctors, will have like a code of ethics, or like there's like just a kind of an unwritten code of ethics. There may even be some things that are formalized now, and there's just so many different groups of UX designers out there. But like codes of ethics of like, this is who we are, what we follow, what we believe in, even down to something like, one of the things that I had overseen like at Capital One was like it was like 127-point checklist. Like it was like a pre-flight checklist before we shipped something, that it would like uphold these standards for quality, accessibility, search functions, like content, best practices. There's like a real sense of like, we got to get this right. And sometimes that's at odds. I will say, sometimes that's at odds with businesses and companies and corporate entities and whatnot that are like speed, agility, launch it at whatever cost, get it out. Like, we want this done by like end of the quarter. And sometimes, like, it's at odds, that rigor, that it takes the time it takes to, like, get right. There's pushback that you as a designer have to say, "Okay, but the reality is if we're going to actually do this right, like, here's kind of a trade-off, and here's the risk if we rush it." But all that to say, yeah, I think it is the people that come from these sort of related fields that are very passionate about, like, this is how we work and getting other people sort of on board and, like, having a collective understanding of what it takes to get there, and then convincing the businesses, the corporate, all those entities, like, "This matters, let's do it right, and you're gonna benefit in the end by, like, taking a pause and following, like, a methodology." That's the best part about this, though, is the people, like, researchers, librarians, like, professors, journalists, like, word people that now we've all kind of come together under this umbrella, and we're like, "Okay, we're, like, the same person, like, we're the same people, just different titles," but we believe in the same things, and so there's a real sense of community in that too, which I love, so.
Now you got me thinking that, I think I need to make a code of ethics for editorial marketers. I think maybe
Absolutely.
marketing is done
Yep.
being considered the shitty, sneaky, whatever it is. And maybe I can give this profession, let's say, and many people in this profession that can be comms, can be content, can be whatever it might be, um, a chance to kind of establish a better name for themselves with some kind
Yeah.
of ethics to follow. It's a great idea. Like I really like the parallel. And I love the fact that the lines seem so word people. The way you talk about content design is the way I talk about comms, about like this
Exactly.
entire space. I think people just need to feel a little bit more confident to stand their ground. And there's something about, like I was saying, there's something about tech and development and things like this where it's almost like if the developers come back and say, "No, it's not done," everybody's just like,
Yeah.
"Ah, okay, we have to wait another sprint."
Exactly.
And it's, like,
Yep.
totally acceptable, but for the
Yep.
rest of us, in content, in language, in, like, the whatever they wanna call the intangible, ephemeral
Yep.
parts of the business, we're expected to, like, ship the stuff regardless, like,
Absolutely.
there are no rules.
Absolutely.
There are no
That's so spot on. I think, yes, I've thought about this a lot too, where like you're right, if it's code, if it's, something being engineered, if it's something like hard, like like something hard, math, science, whatever, like then it's like, okay, we understand it takes time. Unless you empower other people, like something I did at Capital One was like sort of empowered other people that were not UX writers to like, you go ahead and try a first draft, and like let me know and I'll polish from there. We'll work together. But I want you to take a first stab at it so you can see firsthand this is not easy. This is really hard to sit through and think through, and there was a lot of facilitation in that, and it was done sort of a gentle nudge and, like, go ahead and try a first draft, and then a lot of that was really because my bandwidth was very slim, and I would say, "Go ahead and, you try it
yeah.
first, and then we'll meet in the middle." But you're absolutely right. There's some frustration with that, no doubt, where content designers are always advocating for, "This needs more time," or there's, like, it's just impossible to do this in, like, as rapid as you want it to be delivered. I think also you mentioned, like, this code of ethics. It's a good time for that because of what AI has become. I think people also see, well, I can just, put it through a chat GPT or a Claude or any one of the, like, AI tools, and it'll spit out content, done. Like, who needs someone to sort of, like, do this for me? When you get into things like navigation or you get into the wayfinding or the interactions between like screens or flows, whatever, then you're like, I actually need a person to like do this. And it does take time. And now, I see that. So really like empowering your partners, your stakeholders that may not work in comms, that may not work in UX to try a little bit of that for themselves. Very, very eye opening for them to see like, oh, okay, this is not just sitting down and, taking a half an hour to like write a thing. There's a lot that goes into it. There's research, there's wrestling with words and phrases. Just that alone, I mean, takes a lot of time. I used to like literally talk to the wall. Like I like how can I say something in 5 words, a headline that's like cuts right to the core of what I need to say. And that is something that while AI no doubt can sort of get there, like, you still need that, I think, a handheld, like, touch, a person to sort of really, like, drive some of that stuff forward, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think what AI misses is it doesn't realize that
Yep.
stuff exists outside of itself.
Yes.
Like, it sits there and it produces what it wants to produce, but everything stops there. While
Exactly.
we can take into account what does this sound like?
Mhm.
What is the person hearing?
Yeah.
What does this read like if somebody is reading it to themselves in their heads, or if they have to speak it out loud, or if they have to, are they in a
Yeah.
quiet space? Are they in a loud space? Are they in a, like, all of these things we think of when we write anything, we're always thinking of the audience, but an AI doesn't understand anything beyond itself.
Yep.
So for me, this is the critical difference. And actually just the other day, somebody commented on something I wrote on LinkedIn and said, "The problem I have with AI is that whatever it produces, I can't feel it, I can't hear it, I can't
Yes.
smell it, and I can't taste it."
Yes.
And I was like,
Yes.
"Brilliant, brilliant." And if whoever wrote that is gonna listen to this at any
Yeah.
point in time, I apologize that I don't remember your name so I can coin you right now, but really, that's exactly right. And I think that's a lot of what you do. That's a lot of what we do. That's a lot of what everybody in comms that's what comms
Yep.
is that you realize that good communication is 50% my responsibility
Yep.
and 50% what's on the receiving end.
Absolutely it. I think what AI does and accomplishes for efficiency and speed, there's a huge amount of trade-off in terms of, like, it can be a little soulless. It can be flat. It doesn't always get the tone right. It's sometimes, at worst, it can be offensive or just not get, like, things right. There was, I think, an app. It was like a book, like, aggregator app that, like, you can, like, save your books that you wanna read, and there's a
Mhm.
community around it. And there was something that, like, they were experimenting with AI, I think, with, like, basically suggesting other books or similar books to you, and forgetting the nitty-gritty of it, but, like, that AI kind of went off the rails and would, like, make suggestions that were, like, offensive to certain audiences, offensive to certain people, like, the words it was using, I think especially to, like, women or, like, other groups, like, something about it was offensive, and
Yeah.
that was an example of, like, we actually need a writer in the room because if AI kinda just runs on its own, like you said, has no awareness of what is outside of it, it will kind of generate whatever, and without any oversight, without any human checking in, like, or
Without
checking
any
to make
sense of
sure.
responsibility, really.
Exactly, without any sense of responsibility or guardrails around what it can produce, you do run the risk of, like, okay, the thing can just drive off a cliff and, like, really do some damage to your brand, your reputation, your overall messaging. But yeah, just letting everything run on AI alone, for example, like a startup or a small brand to just kind of say, well, we don't need a writer. Everything's going to go through AI. Then you run the risk of, like, there's no oversight. We were talking before about, like, governance issues, things like that. AI can be sort of a detractor long term. So that's why UX designers, UX writers will advocate for, like, you need a person in the room, so to speak, just to make sure that, like, it's doing what it needs to, and that there's also some, like I said, guardrails in place that it doesn't get too kinda out of hand or wacky or offensive or any of those things that we don't want. But yeah, yeah. AI content can feel pretty soulless. I think if you spend time on, like, LinkedIn, you look at, like, some thought leadership pieces, buzzword, keyword, it's just kind of the same thing. I do think we're starting to see, like, hitting, like, diminishing returns or, like, a
Yeah.
wall where people are like, "I've had enough of AI." Like, "This all looks
Which many of us from the beginning were like, we're
Yep.
going to reach this point. I have
Yes.
yet to touch the stuff. I have no idea how it
Exactly.
works. I don't
Exactly.
I have yet to touch it. I've never introduced anything into ChatGPT. I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I understand how it works, but I haven't touched it. Also because in my opinion, people can still forever will be able to do it better because it just doesn't have what we have.
Absolutely.
It's not possible.
Well,
So
humans designing for humans, and so how can a machine design for humans? Like, how can it speak to
yeah, also, I don't wanna
needs
start with
through?
average,
Yeah.
like, I don't wanna start
Yeah.
with some kind of average
Yeah.
thing and then try to improve it or try to
Yep.
I don't know, I prefer to just see what I or a person can come up with
Yep.
based on what they ate that day, or are they emotional today or not, or,
Yeah.
like, what state is their hormones in, like, all that stuff
Yes.
influence things for the better. You need
Yes.
all of that versatility. You need, like, all of
Absolutely.
those little nuances
Yep.
in order to create something great.
I think we're gonna start to see, like I said, where companies are, like, investing so heavily in, we'll just put it through AI, like, AI will handle it. I think we're gonna start to see those companies or brands or what have you start to say, "You know what? Let's hire a more human consultant. Let's hire an agency. Let's hire, like, someone who exactly believes in, like, a human designing for a human." I think that we're gonna start to see more of that. It may not be on a mass scale. There's still gonna be a lot of, like, "AI is everything. We're doubling down on our AI efforts. We're
Which
putting
is
all of our
okay.
money
There
or
is
some."
AI
There's
that
room for
works,
that. Yep,
like
yep.
there's here we're talking about I think more generative AI, like
Yes, yes.
the the things that are
Machine
writing.
learning
Yeah.
stuff, yeah, but for, brand and comms and, like, your space specifically, I think that value is going to be, like, your specific talent, how you write and say things and formulate those thoughts, and then kind of craft them to resonate with people, like, that's going to be really, really valuable and really key, and so it's gonna kind of come back around to where we were 10 years ago, where it's like human first, human centric, like, that's, I think, where we're gonna start to see some things kind of it's cyclical, and I think it's gonna come back to that a bit more than it has in the past year, 2 years. Yeah.
Speaking of that, because we talked about ethics for a moment, and
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, when it comes to content design, and I guess it's content strategy of all
Mhm.
types, because you mentioned content strategist earlier as like another way of saying content designer, and I was thinking how interesting because we use content strategist for another specific category. But anyways,
Mhm.
how like what is your experience with balancing some kind of like full transparency, that people expect, that
Mhm.
the audience expects, with empathy. Like how do
Mhm.
you balance what you want to say from inside and how, who the
Yeah.
brand is versus what is on the outside, how it is received, and even things like ethics, even things I think with something like compliance, it's easier to understand, especially in the financial industry from Capital One. But just for you personally, how do you grapple with that? Like I want to be fully myself. I want to
Yeah.
communicate fully what I intend, but then I also have to be empathetic and understanding of what's on the other side.
Yeah, it's a very tough balance. You mentioned the financial space, Capital One. Like, there's things on that side where, ethics and getting things right as far as disclaimers. And we were doing things like, does this lead, like, is leading, are we leading people to make a decision? Is there active acknowledgement? Do they consent to certain things? Are they getting confirmation that they're doing something? Like, are they aware of what they're ineligible for example, a certain card or product? Like, that's all the ethics involved in financial stuff. And there's a
Mhm.
whole bunch of like tactical things there. I think, like, personally balancing the empathy, the, like, really just being bold and, like, saying, like, kind of what you want to say on behalf of a brand or an experience or a client, like, it's really just pushing the boundaries and being just comfortable with, like, being that brand, like, having that voice, and it's sometimes you lead your client there, you do some exercises. One of the things we did with my first studio was, like, a this but not that exercise, and really getting almost like almost like therapy for, like, brands that are sort of introspective and saying, like, "Who actually are we?" A lot of them would come in with, like, an idea for, like, the glossy, polished sort of, like, look and feel of the brand, but then they would get into, like, the messaging and the language and how we speak, and that was a lot of facilitating them to get to that place where, they will are they bold in how they talk, or are they whimsical? Are they okay with, like, the occasional, like, curse word? Like, being, like, darn good at something, whatever, like, are they okay with, interchanging that for, like, an actual, like, bold language choice? Who are they not? So, having that contrast between who we are not, the who we are not piece is like, well, let me think about who I'm not. I'm not fluffy, I'm not silly goofy, I'm passionate, I'm serious. We are a team of experts, and this is what we do. Those exercises, like, really get to the heart of understanding the identity of the brand from a messaging perspective, and it takes a lot of facilitation, but it's also a mindset shift of, like, getting that brand, that product, that team, whatever, comfortable with their own identity. And then just like a visual brand or visual rebrand or identity, refresh, it's the same thing with messaging, like just getting them comfortable with like their taglines, their like words and phrases, things that are kind of in their like toolbox, so to speak, of who they are, and then like enabling and empowering them to use that everywhere. Certain words and phrases, certain things that they, will put in their headers and footers, of, like an email, like just sort of branding that and putting that sort of everywhere and owning their identity. That's the challenge. And yeah, sometimes, teams or founders or whatever really want to go for it, but they feel like held back. It's like, oh, we don't want to like rock the boat too much. We don't want to be like too bold. But then it's like, well, what's the cost of not? Like, what's the cost of holding back, of being just like everybody else, of just saying the same LinkedIn buzzwords, keyword, then you're just the same. And that's how you put your, flag in the ground and say, this is who we are, and we own that and we run with it. And then it evolves. And that's the thing that I love so much is then, a brand is like off and running and they're really just stepping into their identity and then everything kind of happens from there. So it's a really cool like process to see that happen too. Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the way I always think about, and I'm not saying this is entirely right. I'm just saying it is, it is what it is. The way I think about data quite often for me, and is that I don't want to say I don't want to look at it, but I would prefer not to
Yeah.
many times because I've always felt like I'm looking at some kind of glimpse of the past of what already exists or what was, like by the time I find it, by the time I get that data, it's already too late, I feel like.
Yes. Yes.
But I'm
Mhm.
wondering because when I hear you talk about your experience and again, especially in something like content design that maybe is a little bit closer to some of those like hard practices, like what we're saying about development, and I would assume that data is a big deal. So then do I go with data or do I go with my gut? Do I go with how do you because you it seems like it's a profession that is kind of right in between the
Yeah.
two, and so I think just hearing you talk about it probably would be very insightful for
Yeah,
the rest
that
of us.
is also one of those, like, you're on a fulcrum and you have to just get it right in the middle, right down the line. Data is, especially on that enterprise level for a large enterprise corporate company, like, that is everything. You live and die by the data, and specifically, when there's new intent, it would be like ops or data analysts would be like, "We've crunched the numbers." I think we were talking about this before where you'd get like these PowerPoint decks or these decks of just like every statistical analysis you could possibly think of, bar charts and like line graphs and slicing data every which way. And there's a lot of insight in that. The trick is to not get so in the weeds with it that you can't see the big picture. When you're a UX designer, content strategist, whatever, and you're looking at 20 pages of like pure, like quantitative analysis, you're like, let me pull back and like what is the story? So that's one way of approaching it. The story is okay, people are struggling to upgrade a card or they're struggling to get help in a certain feature or they're struggling and they are canceling or rejecting the product. They're not converting because why, right? And then you go a little bit deeper. I always try to like do that data, that number crunching, what's the story, the data telling me in financial spaces, whatever, like there's calls you can listen to. You can hear the frustration, you can hear the like crazy things people are going through. They're like, they're trying to do something. They're like in their car. They're trying to like, their internet is like not cooperating. There's a lot that goes into some of these scenarios, but listening to those calls and understanding, hearing for yourself the frustration is one thing. And then, there's other documentation that like I think those data analysts can pull if you ask for it. If you say, I want to hear verbatims or like specific complaints, like what is the language somebody used to describe the issue they're having? That in comparison or in addition to rather the data works together. So then you have the statistics, the qualitative, the quantitative, whatever, it all comes together to give you the story that you then run with and say, we need to solve for a, the average sort of middle American credit card holder is struggling with this experience because of these reasons. And you sort of fill in those blanks. And then you have what you need to start sketching out a better experience. And then you test and learn your way into improving it. You have to sort of say, well, everything has a story, even numbers have a story. What is the story? And then kind of go from there.
I like the first party data concept. So there I'm a fan. I draw a line of distinction. And I like that you mentioned that, you always balanced it out because if I think about data, I say, okay, but that would mean that I go, yeah, there's some first party data that I can do based on my platforms. That's true. And I tend to always go there because to look at a report or to look at how should I say, the report has been spliced and diced in a certain
Yeah.
way. I
Yeah.
wasn't there when it was created to understand. Like, I feel like proprietary research is most useful for the proprietor because
Yes.
they know
Mhm.
what they chose to ignore versus what they chose to listen to, they know all of those things. While the rest of us, when these reports are, or this research is published externally,
Mhm.
we don't know that context. So then we just
Yeah.
take whatever they tell us, which is,
Face value. Mhm.
which is not good in the first place. But then bonus, we only pull from that what is relevant, like what is useful for us because we're trying to convince somebody else about something that we
Yep.
believe. And so
Yeah.
I don't like this business of
Yeah.
of reports and data for this reason. And
Yeah.
so and now I'm starting to think a lot more about what you were saying with talking to people directly. Well, in your case, you had, calls that you could listen to, which obviously is not a luxury, but it happens for very large organizations.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
also, I think it's not true that you need 50 or something. Even talking to one person or two, if you're a small or three, is better than none. Like, even if
Absolutely.
it's a little bit biased because there are
Yeah.
only 3 of them instead of 50, it's still much better for your thought process about how you want to proceed, and that filtering that goes on the same way a
Absolutely.
proprietary research would be done.
There is risk in just taking data face value. Like I am fully agree with that. I like when data is like you can put it in a dashboard and play with it yourself and kind of get to like
Mhm.
let me play with it and see what story like I'm looking for because you're right, it is very much filtered through, what does one person want to see and then you take that at face value and the whole like everything that comes after is skewed based on that one insight that we all sort of like anchored to and we became very like rigid about it. I'm so with you. I think one of the coolest things I did at, Capital One and even my own client work and some startups I've worked with is like doing like side by sides. Like I used to go and talk to agents to understand like there's customer pain points, but then like even for agents that were taking like high call volumes, like listening to they and these people would talk on the phone to customers for like 8, 10 hours straight. It's a very demanding, very emotional job. It's a very, like
Yeah.
you're getting calls from, I mean, any emotion, you pick up the phone, you don't know what state someone's gonna be in, and so, I would literally sit in, like, their cubicle with them and listen to how they handled those calls, what types of calls they were getting. There was like, a formula for how they approach things with empathy, and then also, like, led them to, like, being able to accomplish the thing we're trying to do. But that boots on the ground, like, getting into whether it's doing, like, just customer interviews, you can set that up even if you don't do call listening or whatever, you can talk to 5 to 10, people from different demographics within a company or a client or whatever, and just really get to the heart of some of those problem pain points that is in addition to the data, but is not just going on data alone. Those reports you mentioned, like you get a more human element to hearing frustrations firsthand. It's so eye-opening, and so I'm a huge proponent of that. Like, one of the things, unfortunately, with the projects that we were, working on, Capital One was like, we didn't always have time to do that for every single project. We would do user testing, we do prototype testing, but that, like, we like call it, what were we calling it? It was like empathetic, like empathy research or, but something a tool that we used was called like D-Scout. Sometimes you'd have these huge like research studies that they would launch them for like 6 weeks and have people like try to do like budgeting or try to do things over like a 6-week period and then have all the insights from that study, watching how they're like using screens. They would be asked to like just record themselves in the morning on their couch, how they're feeling that day. Those like D Scout studies were
Hmm.
like very human centered. And then you add that to what data analysts are pulling, the story that data is telling, then you have a full picture. And so, yeah, you can't, I think, just bias to the data. You have to go to that human side and hear from people firsthand, even if it takes time, even if, stakeholders don't quite get it. It's like, well, we have the data. Why can't, you just kind of run with it, design and experience? No, like that is a hugely important piece to the overall picture. It affects the language, the messaging, the flow, the psychology of the experience you're trying to design. So yeah, that's not all data. There's data and then there's the humanity of it that gets kind of lost sometimes.
But was there a process? Was there because, we say, "Okay, we understand that it takes time, we want" okay, but when we want to advocate for that, was there some kind of process for how you would scope projects that would allow people that are more business-oriented to understand the justification of those steps?
Yeah,
That we can learn from that for maybe some of the things that we're doing that require the same
yeah,
level of,
yeah.
meticulous attention.
There were a couple things that I sort of like started to lead, like so my portfolio that I was in, that I started to lead stakeholders and leadership into seeing. So for context, I oversaw, I think it was 4 or 5 different sort of like verticals or different
Mhm.
teams that were under one umbrella. And so I started to be very big on advocating for a process to scope what was coming in, all the new intake, all the new intent that product owners would come to, me for. I would say we need to actually scope the time it's going to take for each one of these things to happen. We can't just say yes to everything and I'm running in every direction to make it happen. There needs to be an established process. So one of the things we did was like t-shirt sizing. Is this a small, medium, large, extra large? What size would you give this? And sometimes, a product owner would be like, "Oh, I think it's like a medium." It was like an extra large project. Like it was like a very large project. And you have to get on the same wavelength for what are all the moving parts and expectations involved in getting this done. That was part of it. The other part of it too was, and something we talked about as we were preparing for this, was the content tagging. So when you say, I'm going to need content resources over 2 quarters, typically the way it was done was that's just a line item that's budgeted into the work and like cool thumbs up. For a content designer like myself, I need to know, is this an IA, an information architecture heavy project? Is this a heavy research project? Sometimes it's just research where the business is trying to decide if this is worth pursuing or worth designing. Sometimes it's that really tactical, the UX writing. Sometimes it's strategy, like kind of a higher level beyond an interaction, but a higher level strategy. So just helping like stakeholders, partners, leadership understand what kind of content are you looking for? What kind of like design support are you looking for? And then from there, when we understand the size, the scope, the like elements of the work, then you can start to like understand this is the amount of time that I'm going to say that this takes from my own perspective as someone who does the work. This is how long this is going to take. But that scoping is really, really important and making sure everybody's, like, on the same wavelength as far as how we're talking about the project and how long it's gonna take. It benefits the designers, it benefits the leadership, the stakeholders for how much time and money is gonna be needed, the resources needed. So that's yeah, set expectations first. That is my number one piece of, advice there. Whether you're independent, whether you're working overseeing a team of multiple, just yeah, be very, very over communicate early about expectations.
One of the things that I remember that you told me that I loved is that you said that you said that Capital One believed or
Mhm.
believes that customers can see if an email sounds different from the website, for example.
Yeah,
Like that they
yeah.
can, because I've heard so many times people tell me, like, oh, nobody's going to notice. Nobody's
Yeah,
gonna notice. Nobody's gonna notice. But here you have a very large organization saying, no, no, people notice. And
yeah.
I'm wondering, do you think that's more because of like the fear of compliance and the industry that they're in? Or are there other brands that like, are there others that you feel think in a similar way? Or
Mhm.
because I don't want to give them all the credit if they happen to be in an industry that's like super regulated, therefore
Yeah,
there's a different motive
exactly.
behind it. But I do love the concept.
I think
Um,
it was very much driven, certainly the compliance piece in any financial space, that is like, we have to get that right because it's a risk to any company that if we say one thing in one place and we say it differently in another, or we're making a claim somewhere, or a disclaimer is slightly off in one place or another, that could be used against you. Like that's just a risk that like the every company sort of carries, especially in financial spaces. Beyond that, I think the consistency of like the messaging, the editorial reviews, all of that was very much like this is the decorum of like who we are. Like we get it right like everywhere. And that's a standard we set, a bar we set for ourselves, that we have that attention to detail. We care so much about the user experience that yeah, we spend a lot of time making sure that it's right across every touch point. So there was a little bit of like, I'm saying decorum, or that was sort of just like the brand was like, we are very diligent about this. It takes time. There are multiple layers of like oversight, reviewers, people that are involved in looking at the work. It's not, one designer pushing something out. It's actually up to a couple dozen that are like getting eyes on this through the pipeline, through that handoff pipeline. And so it was very much just in line with like the brand, like excellence in design, like excellence in what we're publishing everywhere. And yeah, it's kind of cool to play in that space where there's like, yes, we kind of are drafty and we start with drafts, but
mm.
then it evolves into we like got to get this right everywhere. We are really diligent about how we speak and write about ourselves, and all those kind of checks are in place to like uphold that. Yeah, very formal process, very formal. You have less rigidity, I think, in startups, in smaller brands, but I
And
think
that's
having
okay?
spirit,
Or do you
that's okay.
recommend?
I think that's okay.
Mm.
As long as there's a spirit of some governance, a little bit of a spirit of, maybe not 120 something point checklist to uphold, but are we checking the box in terms of like we're being transparent, we're being empathetic, we are using a style guide of some sort, like an AP style guide is something that anybody can use, to like make sure that they're using punctuation properly or whatever, like with the
Oxford comma,
the Oxford comma, exactly.
please.
Having a perspective on all of that, and then just having maybe a light checklist to just kind of run through, that, and it can evolve over time, but for a younger brand or a newer brand or something where there's, like, maybe not dozens of content people, maybe there's a team of 1 or 2, just having something light to uphold is a good starting point, and then there's a little bit of, more flexibility. It's not as intense as, like, we must be, like, compliant with every regulation out there, but it's just, here's who we are and how we speak, and are we just meeting that criteria for ourselves? That's good stuff to be thinking about too, and that's the work of, like, a content designer will say, "Let's all sit down and, like, think about what is that checklist." They should be leading that conversation and including if there's legal, if there's marketing or brand, or even just leadership itself, having those conversations and being that advocate for that kind of governance. Yeah, and quality assurance, basically. Yep.
So when you talk about it, it sounds like you're also advocating for the fact that content designers are relevant outside of, let's say, the digital UX
Mhm.
space that we think of, but rather, and I think I've heard you use these words before, but they are the ones that create some kind of blueprint. They create some kind of
Yes.
ecosystem. They create
Yeah.
for content and language, which I find fascinating because imagine it's been enough more than 10 years since I started, and I can't say that I've ever seen a content designer do that in my
Yep.
experience, or somebody even tell me like, "Oh, that's the job of that
Yeah.
person." It's always been me or somebody
Mhm.
that just whoever really valued comms and
Mhm.
language, really, what the one.
Exactly.
Was the way
Yeah,
to do it.
and sometimes it's just if you're a team of one, sometimes it's just you, like, sort of leading those conversations or leading the charge, but yeah, in terms of, like, those different, like, touch points, that gets into so there's the UX, like, content, that gets into, like, service design. That gets into those blueprints where, we talked about this too of like an inverted triangle. The lowest point, the most granular point is like a component level, right? And so like that's like labels or error messages or like CTAs and buttons, progress indicators, things at that component level of like visual components that also play into content that are also content, even though it may not even be words, it still works with the words on that page or on that screen. That's the component level. Interaction level is a layer up. That's where you're moving forwards, backwards, exiting a flow. That's the direction of like the sequence of events, the story arc or sequence of events for how an experience or flow is laid out. That's that
Mhm.
sort of navigation wayfinding almost. And then another layer up, you have, like, moments, and so the moments are when you are entering a flow, what is happening before you even enter the experience? Are you browsing? Are you in your email? Are you waiting for a text message? Like, what is happening in that moment? What is happening when you enter the flow? What is the arc kind of as you're moving through that flow? Are you happy, frustrated? Like, how are we meeting those needs as you move through those moments? And then beyond that, like you have the ecosystem. That's the service design, the blueprinting of like how all of those touch points connect. Like that is where you have like all the channels laid out in one view. I worked on something recently. It's a dashboard for homeowners, and it was taking into account not only how they're navigating through a dashboard, which is sort of a standalone moving through an application experience. They have to upload documents. They have to stay in touch with a coordinator. That's a standalone, but then what is also happening in their email? What is happening to their text messages? What phone calls are they getting? How is all of it pointing back to that dashboard, leading them to that dashboard? For example, if there's a task that they need to do, how do we send them an email that sends them to the dashboard? Like all of
Mhm.
those things, there's a handoff between all of those parts of the journey, and they have to orchestrate and work together. An email by itself has to, work with another touch point. An SMS message has to include a link to a site or dashboard or a login somewhere. It's all like interrelated. And that's where you go from like a junior UX writer will work on that component level, what's the word I'm using in a button, what's the like field label, things like that. Then as you get a little bit more senior, you see the more like fuller kind of experience, then you start being more content design, content strategy, content engineering. That's the stuff that's like this is design, but, like, there's definitely the granular content within that, and you start to see how all those moving parts really work together, and it's yeah, it can get incredibly, like, incredibly nerdy, incredibly complex, and then you're also dealing with other people and making sure that you're all aligned, speaking the same language. For that project, I mentioned the dashboard experience, calling things, what was it, like a global update or like an escalation message so that a
Mhm.
developer can understand what you're talking about when you say like this escalation message has to say this. Everyone knows the language then of those component parts. So that sort of inverted triangle kind of gives an idea of like there's layers to this. And some people work on a specific layer, others sort of like kind of move between them.
And then there's this cool, like, editor-in-chief vibe that you're giving me with the overview, really, and you know I'm, like, a
Yeah.
big fan. I think
Yeah.
there are so
Yeah.
many parallels in this, I love it, really, I knew there were some, but I didn't expect to also find in another conversation, because we've already spoken before,
Yeah.
to find even more parallels to a lot of
Yeah.
the principles that many of us in comms, let's say, uphold. So I don't know, I
Totally.
always want to like better welcome content designers into the
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
And maybe as, like, a closing question, if I can like, what do you guys need from us? You know, if you have the floor
Yeah.
and there are comms folks and marketing directors and content strategists of our blog world, you know, thought leadership world, this kind of side, what do you wanna tell us about, like, what we need to
Mhm.
provide you with, or what are you missing from us, or what do you wish you had in these
Yeah. That's a great question. I think to your point about like the parallels, we all do kind of the same thing, slightly different titles, different roles, different, layers in that triangle I mentioned. Like we all kind of just are in the same circles. And there's something really amazing about that when you get in a room and you're okay, we're jiving, we're speaking the same language. And then I do something slightly different. You do something different and it comes together. The thing I would say about, like, what to ask for, I think, especially for comms, branding, marketing folks that are engaging with UX content designers or UX strategists, I think the biggest thing is when you have a new idea, intent, something spinning up that's a new thing and you want to engage with a content strategist, something I would say is writing a project brief is incredibly helpful. Just a simple Word document that says, "This is what I want to do," or "This is what we as a company intend to do. This is why we believe we need to do it. And this is why we need content to support us in doing this." And that is such a helpful like olive branch to like UX. And from there, I mean, there's so much that can flourish from that. But that is the best starting point to just get something on paper. It can be a draft. It doesn't need to be perfect. We do not have to be thinking about grammar mechanics in that brief. But basically writing something on a napkin and saying, here's the idea, and sliding it over to like a UX designer is incredibly powerful. And from there, then all that data we talked about, all the customer interactions and understanding customer needs, all the journey mapping, all of it comes from that. But having a really solid brief, project brief, a kickoff document, kickoff meeting, what have you, getting clear on that is like the best first place to start. And then the magic happens. So it's exciting, especially when we get to work with like branding experts, marketers. We, as UX people, are also marketers in our own way. We are also
Mhm.
designers. And so we just, yeah, finding the places where I take the ball and run with it, you take the ball and run with it, and then we come together and this whatever we're building, feature, product, brand, it thrives from there. And that's the best part of the whole process. So
I remember that you're also a coach for a lot
yes.
of other content designers.
Yep.
So, I'm just and this is maybe only from my own curiosity, but what do you get asked the most? And what are people struggling
I
with the most in content design right now? Because as
yeah.
you can imagine, I'm looking for more parallels at this
Yes.
point because,
Yes. All the parallels. I get a lot of somewhat new content designers that are like, "How do I get my foot in the door?" And so
Okay.
for me, I started this it was God, I can't believe it's 12, 13 years now, like when
Mm.
I first got my foot in the door. There's so much competition now and so much like it's just so intense. The market sometimes can feel very saturated. People are asking, how do I stand out? How do I tell my story in a unique way? That gets into how do you sort of brand yourself, your own messaging, owning your story. So that's part of it. Another one is people that are pivoting from other fields that I mentioned researchers or teachers. I've had therapists that are actual therapists, like licensed therapists say, I want to get into UX. It's related to what I do, the psychology of it, but it's more tactical, leading them through like the steps to becoming a UX designer. That's another thing that I get for people that are practicing UX writing and content design. A lot of it comes back to that advocacy that I mentioned of like, how do I get a stakeholder to understand like I need more time? How do I sort of tell the story of the work that I'm doing to someone that doesn't really maybe see the value in it? How do I compete with AI? Like it's questions like that that are very much like people that are in the work, they understand how it's working, but it's really how does UX content play with other fields or other people and how do we sort of stand out as like a crucial part of the design process? And like, what are those conversations like? How do we make the case for content within orgs, within teams? A lot of solo content designers that are like, I want to build out practice. How do I get the buy in to do that? So, yeah, conversations like that, which, yeah, have had those myself. I've been through those and can kind of share some field notes from kind of how I approached it. So, yeah, I love the coaching element of all this too. We all really need it. There's so much competition that sometimes it feels like, oh, I need to like cage myself in and not share my process and not share how I approach something. It's quite the opposite. Like open book. Like I'm an open book. Whatever you want to know about how I approach something, happy to tell you. Like we have to sort of like help each other through that way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I remember this video of Elon Musk. Okay, think whatever people wanna think about him. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
the stuff is going, and he was talking about his hiring process, which I think is relevant, valuable, probably to hear from him,
Yeah.
and he was saying, "When I go to hire somebody, I ask them very specifically, 'What is the challenge that you face and how did you solve it?'" And he
Yeah.
said, "And I
Yeah.
pry into the how as much as I possibly can." He said, "Because a lot of people will come to you and say, like, ah, there was this problem and then, we solved it with this and the results were like this." And they'll try to kind of like I'm paraphrasing and kind of reading between the lines here of what he said, but they'll try to weasel their way around the
Yeah.
story a bit and tell
Yeah.
you like a very good emotional story almost to distract you from the fact that they actually weren't the ones necessarily doing the work
Mhm.
and they
Yep.
don't really understand how it was done. So he said, for me, it's important that I find the ones that did the work. So
Yeah.
I want to understand exactly how they did it. I want the details. I want the
Process.
specifics.
Yes. That's
And
why I
that just
always
goes to
say
show the importance of showcasing how we do things, and I
that's
repeat
it.
this word "how" I think more than probably
Yeah.
anything else.
When junior designers or just designers of any kind are like talking about the portfolio and it's all the like the wins. It's all the like here's the highlight reels of everything I've done, the problem to results. There's just a win the whole way through. It is not like that. Design is you go through a roller coaster, you go through pushbacks and setbacks and, didn't have the time and people hated it and, we had to take something back to the drawing board and stakeholders were like, had their inputs and there's just it's a very yeah, it's a roller coaster of a process. And so I always am like advocating like tell people what didn't go right, or if something you shipped, say you didn't get to have full ownership of the end result. Maybe we went with like somebody's opinion. We just kind of had to like concede and design and ship it. How would you have, made a recommendation differently? How would you have changed something? And like showcasing that thought process is what UX leadership is looking for, design leadership is looking for. It's not all the end process. It's the how you got there, not just the linear, but the like loops and valleys and squiggles and like the very nonlinear design process. There's a fear of sharing the reality of the process for fear of, I think, like anything nonlinear is like a flawed somehow. It's like I
Yeah.
did wrong or I don't know what I'm doing. No, like, be transparent about that because that, I think, says a lot more about you as a designer that you can trust to say, "I do not have all the answers all the time, but through this process, I will get to it." But it's one
Mhm.
big squiggle. The design process really is a squiggle, and then eventually it gets to a very polished state, but the process is yeah. When you're working with fellow designers, we were always joking, like, we're in the trenches together. Like, when you're with myself, I would partner with a lot of UI designers, visual designers, strategists. You are in the trenches, and sometimes you'll just sit there and be like, "I don't know what's happening," but, like, you just plod forward and work it out together, and that's where there's a great relationship dynamic with your fellow designers because you're going through this process that is chaotic, at times messy, and not linear, but you're in it together, and there's a camaraderie in that too, which is just the best, so yeah, yeah,
What a sweet moment to end on. The collective
yeah,
experience of the squiggle.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
we
the name of your
all
next book.
struggle.
No.
Exactly, there's something there. Yeah, advocating for the imperfection of the design process, like, yeah, there's something there. Yeah.
Thank you so, so much,
Thank you
really,
for
for
me.
the
This was
conversation.
amazing. Thank you for
Always
reaching out.
eye-opening, always
Yeah.
eye-opening, really. I'm definitely rewatching just to so that I can properly take notes and digest, and
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a lot there. So I'm sure there's
We're
I need to keep looking into it. I was right when my intuition told me, like, there's something about content design.
yeah.
Now I
Now
understand
you
a lot
get it.
more
I'm so
why.
happy. There's so much to it. There's a lot under the iceberg. There's a lot more than meets the eye, and I'm excited. Would love to have you, come on agenda list, talk about, anything that, you want kind of people to know and have no agenda. We'll just challenge ourselves to not have any talking points and just see where things lead. I think that's the squiggle I think that I'm talking about too, the squiggle in the
The
conversation with
squiggle
my
life.
fierceness in that. Yeah. Yeah, the squiggle life. Exactly.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you for
Likewise.
being here. Thank you for everybody that joined or that is watching the recording. If you have any questions, Amanda is in the community, so if you want to tag her or comment on
Absolutely.
the event or whatever it might be, she'll respond, or if not, I will grab her, get her to give you the answer you
Sounds
need.
great.
So, until then, thank you again, Amanda, and
Absolutely,
I
Flavia.
wish
Thank
you all a
you.
wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.